I reported a rape, and the case ended in court, and he was acquitted on the basis that the intention to the violence wasn't proved enough.
Il Presidente!
Ma cos'è la
Che
sinistra?
significa se rischi adesso?
The resolution is adopted.
Hello and welcome back to Take a Left, the podcast from the Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament. That was Kristine Holst, Danish activist and rape survivor. Her advocacy contributed to Denmark changing their law on rape so that what happened to her would be considered rape and would lead to a conviction. Because only 13 EU countries have laws defining rape as sex without consent. The others require victims to prove the use of force or threat for the act to qualify as rape. We currently have a historic opportunity to change that in the EU. We are in the middle of negotiations between the EU's institutions on the first ever European legislation aimed at protecting women from violence. My colleague Dana spoke to Kristine and our MEP Evin Incir about our fight to classify all non-consensual sex as rape.
Pina, thank you for joining us and thank you for having made this decision to speak up. When we think of rape, we always summon this image of a stranger attacking us in a dark alley, this faceless man coming out of the darkness. This is not always the case. Rapists have faces, and most of the time it's faces that the victims know. This is a safe space. Will you share your story with us, Christina?
Yes, in 2017, I reported a rape to the police, and the case ended in court, and he was acquitted. On the basis that the intention to the violence wasn't proved enough. And I got very angry because I thought that my rights were violated, and I contacted a lot of organizations, among them Amnesty, who at that time was about to make a report about rape in Denmark. And I agreed to contribute to the report and to contribute to the fight for a new law in Denmark, and also to change things in the system, at the police, in the court system, how they handle rape cases, because I could see that there were many problems, and I think I had experienced most of them. Even though I thought that I was treated terrible and the police investigation was terrible, I discovered that my case was actually very normal for Denmark's standards. So I began the fight with Amnesty and a lot of other activists, and in Denmark and abroad, and we had a new law in 2021.
So your perpetrator, the rapist, was not charged with anything. But do you think things would have ended up differently had you had already this law in Denmark at the time when it happened?
Yes, because he was charged, but he was acquitted in the court. Because at that time, in cases where the victim had said no and stop, and had resisted verbally, the perpetrator could still be acquitted. And my case was an example of that, and was used also by the legal counsel later, for an example of cases where the right to sexual anatomy was violated, and why we should have a new law. But actually, with the law we had in Denmark, it wasn't enough to say no. And my case was an example of that. The victims have a lot of confidence in the new law in Denmark. It takes some time to change the court system, how they handle these cases, but the police has been much better handling them. And of course, also in the society, we have changed the rules, and it is enough that you had said no now, and you don't have to, there aren't that expectation of that you have resisted your perpetrator, which is a terrible thing to ask a victim of violence to do. because it has a tremendous risk of, most women know that if you fight with your perpetrator, you could get killed, because women get killed when they get raped. Some women do. It's a risk, no risk. And there can be a lot of reasons why people don't resist when they are subjected to violence. For example, that you could have been subjected to violence when you were a child, and your brain had learned that the best thing to do when you get threatened is to be quiet and freeze. And that's a normal human response to violence. And that's a normal human response to rape. And, the previous law we had that was founded on culture, old, ancient culture, and not science, that the consent-based rape law is.
Okay. Thank you for your testimony. Now we're going to move on to Evin, one of the leading MEPs in the European Parliament, fighting against gender-based violence, fighting for new legislation on the topic. So it's 2023, and we apparently still need laws to tell us that it's not okay to rape. And there are still countries that don't seem to get that consent should be enshrined in the law. Why?
Well, that's a big and important question, of course. Why? The answers, I would say, look a bit different in different member states. Some use the excuse of this is national competence. Others actually have an ideological reason behind it, that they don't even want the directive at all. For example, Hungary and Poland, we know that those governments do not want the directive at all. Now, we're happy that the government has changed in Poland, that the new government might have another stand on this. We are really eagerly waiting for the new stand. We want a yes means yes, and everything else means no. Because when you get silence is not a yes. So you shouldn't even need to say no. What should require is that you said yes. Everything else should be always no. So we have a big challenge, and we are right now turning to the different governments and demanding for them to start understanding that we need to save women's lives and ensure the access to fundamental rights. It's not enough that half of the population in Europe have access to their fundamental rights, and we as women and girls do not.
Indeed. So the Commission last year in March proposed a new legislation to combat gender-based violence, but the governments of member states, so the Council, completely wiped out all rape provision from it. Why?
Exactly, and this was what I was just mentioning about that we are, I myself and many other colleagues and women's rights activists are very much shocked that there is such a resistance from countries even as Germany and France. Right now, it's the decision is actually on President Macron's table himself. And in Germany, it is on the table of the Minister of Justice, Marco Buschmann. And these are two men, to start with, but belonging to the liberal groups. And when, in my world, the progressive forces in Europe should actually take leadership for this. But this is not the case right now. And I'm very much shocked, and more than that, this is unacceptable, because if a directive, such a directive, do not include a consent-based rape legislation, what should it include? Because that should be at least the minimum of what a directive on combating violence against women and domestic violence should include.
So, worst case scenario, do you think this is the lost battle?
No, not at all. We are in negotiations with the Spanish presidency, since it's the Spanish government who is leading the EU this half year. And we are looking at a different alternative for us from the side of the parliaments. There is one red line, and that's that we don't go below the Istanbul Convention provisions. So it needs to be, that's the minimum standard, that it needs to go hand in hand with the Istanbul Convention wordings.
So in this directive, we not only have or need rape, we also have additional clauses like education or cyberbullying, how to fight that. Can you detail a bit on this?
Yeah, when it comes first to the consent-based rape legislation, we have even actually managed to make some government change their stance. The conservative government in Sweden, for example, were not in favor of it until a couple of weeks ago. And that was after mass mobilization among the women's rights organizations also and the women's rights activists in Sweden. So very clearly, everything is possible through organizing, mobilizing, and jointly putting pressure. And about the directive at large, it is about preventing but also combating. So we need to start talking about these harmful practices that are taking place and combat them. We also need to, in early age, start the conversation about harmful practices and that it shouldn't occur. And the importance of consent, because I remember, it was many years ago, but when I was much younger, in the second, third, fourth grade, when young boys were pushing a girl, then you were told don't mind it, or when a young little boy was touching a girl in private areas, it was but he's curious. We need to start the conversation at an early age that we cannot touch anyone without the person's consent, because we know that men's violence against women starts with boys' violence against girls. And that's what we as society, as grown-ups, teach the children that paves the way for the situation right now and the future.
That is indeed the progressive way of dealing with things, and that's how it should be dealt with. But the Parliament, the European Parliament, has almost unanimously backed your report on this, which is amazing because they're like, women's rights are in our DNA. It's normal as progressives. But you have conservatives and right-wing people, MEPs backing you. How did you achieve this?
I think in this case, it really showed how important it is that we as progressive women, regardless of which party political group we belong to, join forces. And this, of course, when we look at this parliament, we know that it's women and people actually in general in all political groups except the far-right groups. But this is nothing that we expect less from the far-right, because unfortunately their view is constantly that they have raised it also here in the parliament, that there is not such a thing as men's violence against women or domestic violence. It's just violence. I mean, we talk about organized crime. Nobody says there is no organized crime. There is just crime. And if we can acknowledge there is organized crime, then we need to be able to acknowledge that there is men's violence against women, domestic violence that is hitting at least half of the population, and including more children also. But what we did is we have two co-rapporteurs, one from the Committee of Civil Liberty, Justice, Home Affairs, and then another from the Committee of Gender Equality. And the rapporteur from Gender Equality Committee. And I think that for the Conservatives, it's been bigger of a challenge, because in the SND, we have always taken this lead for these issues. But I'm happy that I have a co-rapporteur that also is super progressive.
Pina Picerno is Vice President of the European Parliament and one of the negotiators on this file. My colleague Marzia spoke to her in Brussels. They spoke in Italian, but don't worry, we've dubbed it. She starts off reflecting on yet another femicide in Italy.
C'è una sola cosa che ci accomuna per il fatto
There
di
is only
essere
one
donne.
thing that
Il fatto di
unites
essere
us,
tutte
because we are
vittime
women.
di violenza in
The
qualsiasi
fact that we are all victims of
sociale,
violence in any
religiosa,
social,
economica,
religious,
lavorativa,
economic or
è la
work
cosa che davvero
condition.
ci accomuna di più.
That's
I
the thing that
dati,
really unites us the most.
europei da questo punto di vista non
European
sono diversi da
data
quelli
on this
dell'Italia.
is not different from the data
Una
of
donna
Italy.
ogni
A woman is killed
6 ore
every 6 hours
viene ammazzata
in Europe. Every 6 hours.
E questi dati ci ricordano
These data remind
la
us
necessità di
of the
agire,
need to
perché
act,
appunto le donne
because all women,
muoiono non
they
a
die not
causa
because of a natural
di
disaster.
una
They do not die
catastrofe
because of an
naturale,
earthquake or a
muoiono a
flood
causa
or
di un
something that is
terremoto, di
independent of the
un'alluvione,
will And that happens by force. They die because they're killed. But there is something special about this crime. The victims are all women, and the murderers are all men. The culture that fuels this violence concerns everyone. Young people, not so young people. It must be stopped. It's about men, and this culture has a specific name, patriarchy. And this is where we must intervene. We're trying to work on this here in the European Parliament.
Pina went on to talk about the specifics of dismantling a patriarchal culture which we have lived with for a very long time.
Si possono fare una serie combinate di azioni in cui tutte sono
Yes,
importanti.
exactly, as you say.
Non è semplice,
It is exactly
questo
part of
dobbiamo
this
dirlo,
patriarchal culture that we
perché,
have been
come tu
carrying around for
ricordavi,
centuries, I would say, and
ci
which is still
portiamo dietro
difficult
questa
to completely
cultura
tear down.
da decenni e
But what can be done
decenni,
about it?
da secoli tu dicevi, insomma da moltissimo
It's not easy. We have to say this, because as you pointed out, we've been carrying this culture with us for decades and decades, centuries, in short, for a very long time, and therefore we must imagine a series of coordinated actions that are all indispensable. The focus on prevention, of course, as the Istanbul Convention reminds us, is a legally binding instrument that helps us prevent violence. The Istanbul Convention reminds us that violence always originates from an unbalanced relationship, right? Therefore, all that legislation that we have also produced here with respect to the need to move in the direction of effective equality of women, goes in the direction of preventing violence. If we reduce the imbalance that exists between women and men, that unbalanced relationship, and as I said, that is at the origin of violence itself, we can reduce the distance from an economic point of view, the gap. We did a directive on wage transparency. I recall here the Women on Boards Directive, which was also a great success, our political family success. In short, all these actions serves to reduce that imbalance and therefore to act on prevention. Then of course, there is the issue concerning education, sexuality, which is not done in some countries, in truth. And yes, in my country, Italy, is certainly not a topic for discussion. And this is also very important. As important as fair sentencing for those found guilty. As important as organic definition of violence. What I want to say is that we have definitions, even from a legal point of view, that differ from country to country on what violence is. I'm thinking about the crime of rape, which we are thinking about right now in the Violence Directive. And in many countries, there is no such thing as rape codified as a lack of consent. Violence does not exist precisely as a lack of explicit consent. And instead, we want to define it in this way. That is, we want to define that exists from a naturally legal and regulatory point of view. That it is always violence in the absence of explicit consent.
Firstly, thanks to you for listening to Take a Left. Thanks to Christina for sharing her story. We're going to keep fighting to make sex without consent the definition of rape across the EU. We'll close with a new song composed specifically about this fight by the artist Ezria. Here's We Are Listening.
There's no way to make this wrong right. You played the part, you paid the price. You've been walking wounded through the years. You've been faking smiles through tears. Time alone won't heal this bruise. No need to doubt your memories. You didn't bring this on yourself. We won't let your words fade. Your voice deserves to resonate. It's up to us to break the silence. Consent is everything. We are listening. We will plant the seeds of justice. We won't look the other way. What you endure does not define you. No victim blaming, no more shame. You are stronger than you know. Reclaim your body, mind, and soul. Every myth will fall. We are listening. We are listening. We are listening. We are listening. We won't ask you what you will.